What if the life I built crumbled before my eyes without warning? I spent my entire life believing in love, until the pain of betrayal forced me to see the truth I feared more than anything. At 68, with invisible scars and a broken heart, I found myself at a crossroads. Continue living the lie, or finally face the reality, no matter how devastating it may be. My story will make you question everything you knew about trust, loyalty, and what it truly means to survive. Stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to reveal could change the way you see the world. Don't look away.
Do you believe in fairy tales? I did, until reality knocked on my door and destroyed everything. At 68, I carry scars no one sees, and today I've decided to tell the truth. It's not easy, but it's necessary. I lived a whole life dreaming of love and ended up trapped in a nightmare no one can imagine. This story might change how you see trust, silence, and even what it means to survive. Stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to reveal will chill you to the bone. My name is Mary Lou Carter, and at 68, I have more stories to tell than I'd like to remember. Today, looking back at everything I've lived, I can't help but wonder, how did life bring me to this point? How did I get to this place of looking back and finally seeing what I never wanted to see? This is a story that, for many, might seem like a fairy tale gone wrong, but for me, it's simply my story. And as I relive it, I ask you to subscribe to my channel, like the video, and share in the comments where you're watching from. Your presence here means more to me than you can imagine. I was born in Bell Buckle, Tennessee, a quiet little town where everyone knows everyone, where secrets don't stay hidden for long. I grew up believing that life was simple and that people were good, until life showed me that things are not always what they seem. Bell Buckle was the kind of place where appearances mattered more than truth. The church was the heart of the community, and families judged each other. There wasn't much room for questioning, only for conformity. And so, I was raised with the weight of an expectation to be a good woman, learn to cook, sew, keep the house spotless, all before even thinking about romance or anything that would distract me from what should be my mission in life. But I dreamed, oh, how I dreamed. I dreamed of finding someone who would make me feel alive, someone who would take me away from the rules of Bell Buckle and show me that there was more to the world than the simple role of wife and mother. And then one day, Thomas Carter appeared in my life. He came from a neighboring town looking for work, and at 22, with brown hair falling over his forehead and a charming smile, he seemed everything Bell Buckle was not. He was different. He wasn't the type of guy who fit the town's mold, and perhaps that's what attracted me so much to him. He fit my dream more than I could have ever imagined. I was 19 when I met him. I worked as a seamstress, helping my mother pay the bills, and it was on those work afternoons that Thomas would pass by my house on his way to the lumber mill. He always waved at me with a shy smile, and I naively believed he was interested in me. Slowly, we started talking, and like everything in Bell Buckle, conversation soon turned into something more, something I didn't quite know what it was, but it made me feel more than ever. Thomas asked me to be his girlfriend after a few months, and I was enchanted, as if my life had finally begun. My father, however, was not so enthusiastic. He looked at Thomas with suspicion, as if he were too good to be true. Be careful, Mary Lou. He may seem good, but what you don't see is what really matters, he would say. But I was in love, and deep down, I knew my father was wrong, or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. We got married the following year. It was a simple wedding, without pomp or big parties, but what mattered was the love we felt. The dress I wore was made by me and my mother, and Thomas wore a suit borrowed from a friend. We had no wealth, but we had each other, and that, for me, was enough. What more could I need? The first years of marriage were happy, but also challenging. We lived in a simple little house on the outskirts of Bell Buckle. We had old furniture and a life without luxury, but we had love. That's what I told myself whenever life seemed to get tough. Thomas worked at the lumber mill, and I still sewed to help pay the bills. We didn't have much, but we had everything we needed, or so I thought. And then, 2 years later, Samuel was born. He was the greatest blessing in our lives, and when he came into the world, I felt that everything had finally found its place. His bright eyes and sincere smile were all I needed to feel complete. Thomas, on the other hand, seemed happy, but also worried about the future. "I'll work twice as hard to make sure he has everything he needs," he would tell me. And he did, starting to work overtime at the factory and even taking odd jobs on weekends. I admired his dedication, but at the same time, I missed him. He was always so tired, too tired even to play with Samuel. But I believed with all my heart that we were building a solid life, a life that would last forever. Samuel grew fast, as all children do, and with each passing day, he became more curious and smarter. I saw him exploring the backyard, asking questions about everything and anything, and I loved it. Even on difficult days, he made me smile. Even when sleepless nights accumulated, I knew there was something good in all of this. After all, that's what we lived for, to see him grow. However, something was starting to change. I began to notice that something was wrong, but I didn't know what. Small signs that I tried to ignore, like the fact that Thomas was increasingly tired, even when he wasn't working overtime, or how he started avoiding certain topics when I questioned him about his day. When he came home, he seemed distant, but I wanted to believe it was just work stress, that he needed some time to himself, that everything would be okay. I didn't want to see what was right before my eyes. I didn't want to believe that something was happening. It was on a spring afternoon that something happened, and my life changed forever. I was on the porch, sewing a dress for a client, while Samuel played with the wooden cart his father had made for him. Thomas came home early from work that day. It was rare. He seemed nervous, as if he expected someone to follow him. I knew something was wrong, and when I asked what was going on, he just replied, "Nothing, I'm just tired." But even so, I knew it wasn't just that. It wasn't. I looked at him, trying to understand, and then Samuel ran to me, holding his wooden cart. "Mommy, why is Daddy sad?" he asked with innocent eyes. I smiled, trying to hide the fear forming inside me. "He's tired, my love, that's all." But I knew it wasn't just that. There was something more, something I still couldn't understand, but which, later, would reveal itself to be the most painful truth of my life. Life in Bell Buckle continued its course, and for a long time, I thought that was exactly what I wanted: stability. Thomas was still always busy with work, but we had Samuel. He was the reason I got up every day. He brought light into my life in a way I didn't know was possible. When he ran through the backyard with that happy smile on his face, everything seemed right in the world. He gave me strength to continue, even when the nights seemed longer and the days harder. It was curious how life seems to follow its routine, how the seasons change and, with them, our way of facing the world. Every spring brought something new, something fresh, but it also brought me a feeling that something was changing. The truth is, even with all the love for Samuel, there was a part of me that was starting to question. I knew things between Thomas and me weren't like before, but I couldn't understand why. I tried to convince myself that it was all just the weight of responsibilities, financial difficulties, pressure. But deep down, I felt that something was slowly crumbling. Samuel was growing, and with him, a series of small discoveries about the world. He became increasingly curious, always with 1,000 questions, always wanting to know more about everything. He was no longer the little boy I held in my lap. Now, he wanted to help in the kitchen, wanted to learn to sew, and I felt proud to see him become such a sweet and attentive child. "Mommy, one day I'll be big like Daddy and I'll take care of you," he would tell me, with that sparkle in his eyes, and deep down, I believed he was capable of anything. I spent my mornings sewing for clients, while he played or helped me. Sometimes he would pick up a piece of fabric and say, "Mommy, look, I'm making something like you." And my heart swelled with pride. I knew life was hard, that the future would be complicated, but he still had that innocence, that faith that the world could be good, and that gave me hope. Thomas, on the other hand, always seemed more distant. I watched him, trying to see in him the man I married, but what I saw now was a stranger. He came home late, too tired to talk, to play with Samuel, to share his day with me. Sometimes he would just walk through the door and head to the bedroom, without saying a word. "I'm just tired," he would say when I asked, but looking into his eyes, I knew there was something more there, something he wasn't willing to share. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to believe he was just overwhelmed by work, by the pressure of bills, by stress. I wanted to believe it would all pass and go back to how it was. But every day, I felt we were further apart. I was drifting away from him, and he was drifting away from me. But I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to face the truth. I didn't want to admit that something was happening to him, nor that our life together was slowly disintegrating. I, who had always been so strong, so focused on what should be, began to feel a deep anguish. Each day seemed like a repetition of the last, an endless routine of work, tiredness, and silence. I tried to keep the house tidy, tried to make Samuel happy, but my heart was starting to empty. Something was missing, and I knew that something was Thomas. He was no longer the same, and I, no matter how much I tried to deny it, was no longer the same woman. That night, Thomas arrived later than usual. I was already used to it, but something that day told me something was different. He seemed nervous, looking around as if he was waiting for something or someone. I didn't ask anything immediately. He walked past me without a word and went straight to the bedroom. But when I looked at his face, I saw something I couldn't ignore. There was guilt in his eyes, something he was trying to hide from me, and that made me feel like I was about to crumble. That night, as he slept beside me, I lay awake, thinking about what had happened to our lives. He no longer shared with me, no longer trusted me, and I didn't know what to do with that. I was afraid he would leave me alone, or worse, that he was letting something more important than our family take over him. My father always said, "Men are weak, Mary Lou. They get lost easily." I never wanted to believe that, but that night, doubt invaded me, and the fear that my father was right became real. I was so absorbed in my own thoughts, trying to understand what was happening, that I didn't notice Samuel was at my bedroom door. He had that curious and worried look, as if he knew something wasn't right. "Mommy, why is Daddy sad?" he asked, and at that moment, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to explain to him that the man we loved so much was drifting away from us, that the man who promised to take care of our family was getting lost in a way I no longer knew how to stop. "He's tired, my love," I replied, trying to hide the tears that were starting to well up. That's all. But I knew it wasn't just that. It wasn't. I was scared. Scared of losing Thomas. Scared of losing our family. Scared of not knowing how to deal with the pain that was growing inside me. But I couldn't show that to Samuel. He was just a child, and I needed to be strong for him. I needed to believe that everything could still be fixed. But deep down, a part of me already knew that things would never be the same again. Something was broken between us, and I didn't know if we could fix it. Life, as I knew it, was starting to slip through my fingers, like fine sand. The routine continued, but everything around me seemed to slowly fall apart, as if it were a dream about to end. I still woke up early, took care of the house, tried to keep things in order for Samuel. But inside me, a storm was brewing, a growing pain that I didn't know how to control. Thomas's behavior worsened every day. It was no longer just the tiredness he hid behind forced smiles. He was starting to distance himself from me in a way I could no longer ignore. He came home late, but now there was something more. The smell of alcohol on his clothes was getting stronger, as if he was drinking to escape the pain I already knew he was carrying. Every time he came home like that, I felt a tightening in my chest. I tried to ignore it, as I always did, trying to convince myself that he was just trying to cope with the weight of life. But every time he walked through the door with that smell, something inside me told me that things were becoming much more complicated than I could bear. And Samuel, my dear Samuel, was starting to notice. He was so intelligent, so perceptive. He felt the heavy atmosphere Thomas brought with him, and I didn't know how to protect my son. When he asked me what was happening with Daddy, what could I answer? I wanted to tell him that everything was fine, that things would get better, but I knew that would be a lie. I didn't know what was happening, and that tore me apart. The truth, which I feared more than anything else, was approaching. I could feel it in every unspoken word, in every glance Thomas avoided giving me. That night, Thomas came home even later than usual. I was already tired. I no longer had the strength to keep up appearances. Samuel was already asleep, and I was sitting in the living room, trying to finish a dress for a client, but I couldn't concentrate. When I heard the door open, my heart skipped a beat. Something told me that night would be different. I heard him dragging his feet through the house, as if he was carrying an enormous weight. When he entered the room, I knew something was wrong. "Are you okay, Thomas?" I asked, trying not to show the fear spreading inside me. He looked at me, but didn't answer immediately. His eyes were red, and his face, usually calm, was now marked by tension. He seemed more tired than ever, and again, the smell of alcohol filled the room, bringing with it a sense of despair. "I'm just tired, Mary Lou. Work is consuming me." He said these words, but I knew he was lying. I could see the pain in his eyes, and anguish was etched on his face. He was trying to hide, trying to escape, but I knew the truth was unfolding right before me, and there was no avoiding it. He sat on the couch without saying anything else, and I stood there looking at him. I wanted to ask what was happening. I wanted to scream, demand answers. But instead, I found myself paralyzed by doubt, by the fear that the answer he gave me would be the worst possible. Was he distancing himself from me for some reason I didn't understand? Or did he no longer love me? When Thomas looked at me, I noticed something I had never noticed before. He was lost. Lost in a way that had no return. I wanted to run to him, hug him, ask what was consuming him, but all I did was stand there, watching him get lost. He seemed so distant, so empty, as if he was sinking into something I couldn't save him from. "Thomas, what's happening to you? To us?" I finally asked, my voice low and full of anguish. He looked at me, but his eyes didn't meet mine. He looked away, as if avoiding something he didn't want to face. "I don't know, Mary Lou. I don't know what's happening to me," he replied, with a deep sadness in his voice, as if he was surrendering to something he couldn't control. And at that moment, I realized he was as lost as I was. He was trying to protect me, but in reality, he was sinking into something much darker, something he didn't know how to get out of. And in his attempt to hide it from me, he was sinking even deeper. That night, I stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. What could I do now? How could I help Thomas when he was already lost in his own despair? I was so confused, so scared, that I didn't know where to go. And worst of all, I was starting to realize that maybe even he didn't know where he was anymore. And that terrified me. He had always been my support, the man with whom I dreamed of building a life. And now, he was falling apart right before me, and I didn't know how to stop it. That night was the first time I felt the real weight of everything that was happening. It was no longer a matter of appearances. It was no longer a matter of trying to convince myself that everything was fine. Things were falling apart, and I didn't know how to deal with it. All I knew was that my life, what I believed to be my future, was about to be destroyed, and I didn't know if I would survive it. The next day, everything seemed clearer, but even more painful. Reality had set in, and I knew the fight was just beginning. And as always, doubt and fear accompanied me. Like a shadow I didn't know how to shake off. I tried to resist, tried to believe that everything would go back to normal. I tried to keep up appearances, because Bell Buckle, that small town full of watchful eyes, didn't forgive failures. It didn't forgive weaknesses. Every movement, every gesture was observed and judged. And I knew that if anyone knew what was really happening inside our house, gossip wouldn't be long in starting. But with each passing day, it was harder to ignore what was right in front of me. Thomas was drifting away, and I knew it. He was no longer the man I had known. Something in him had changed, and I no longer knew if it was the pressure of work, the debts, or something deeper. I felt as if he was sinking deeper and deeper into a hole he couldn't get out of. And worse, I didn't know how to help him. I didn't know if he wanted to be helped. It was on a Friday night, after a long day at work, that something happened. I knew Thomas's job was consuming him, but that night, he seemed especially distant, more lost than usual. He came home later, more tired, with that familiar smell of alcohol on his pores. When he walked through the door, he said nothing. He simply walked past me and went straight to the bedroom. I was sitting in the living room, my hands still trembling from the day's agitation, and for a moment, I felt a physical pain in my chest. Something was wrong, and I no longer knew what to do. The silence in the house was overwhelming. The air was heavy, and I could feel the weight of the distance between us. I wanted to go to him, ask what was happening, tell him how worried I was, but deep down, I knew he wouldn't answer me. He no longer cared enough to tell me. That night, while he was in the bedroom, I decided to do something I never thought I would do: investigate. I knew something was happening, and I needed to know what. When I entered the bedroom and saw Thomas lying on the bed, still wearing his work clothes, something inside me told me he was hiding something from me, something he didn't want me to know. I looked at the side of the bed and saw Thomas's jacket thrown on the floor. I picked it up, hesitantly, and felt a knot form in my throat. There was something in the jacket pockets, something he didn't want me to see. It was a receipt from a bar in the neighboring town, Shelbyville, dated 2 days earlier, when he should have been working. The receipt was crumpled, as if he had tried to hide it, but failed. My heart started beating faster, and a sense of dread invaded me. I knew what this meant. I knew, but I didn't want to believe it. I sat on the bed, the receipt still in my trembling hands, and felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. How could he do this to me? After everything we'd been through, after everything we'd built together, how could he be betraying me? I looked at him, sleeping there, as if nothing was wrong, as if nothing had changed, but I knew everything was wrong. I knew he had lied to me, and the pain was so great that I almost felt physically crushed by it. I wanted to wake him up, confront him, ask him what was happening, but at that moment, I realized he wouldn't have answers for me. He had no answers, and I knew I was no longer ready to hear the lies. The next day, while Thomas was having coffee, I tried to remain calm, trying to hide the whirlwind of emotions forming inside me. I knew I needed to confront him, but at the same time, I was terrified. What would I do after knowing the truth? What if he told me that everything I feared was true? I wasn't ready to hear it, but I knew I had to know. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it destroyed me. "Thomas," I said, my voice trembling but controlled. "I found something last night. A receipt. You were in Shelbyville. You weren't working, as you told me. What's going on?" He stopped drinking his coffee, and for a moment, I saw fear in his eyes. He didn't look at me directly. He looked away, and that, in itself, was an answer. He knew I knew, and seeing him like that, lost, I realized he was no longer the man I loved. "Mary Lou," he began, his voice hoarse. I didn't want to worry you. I just needed some time. I went to the bar with some colleagues after work. It didn't mean anything. I didn't want to hurt you." I looked at him, trying to understand what he was telling me. Those words, those excuses, made no sense. I knew there was more. Something told me he wasn't telling me the truth. Something was wrong, and I knew it wasn't just the bar. "You didn't want to hurt me," I repeated, the pain growing in my voice. "You betrayed me, Thomas. You lied to me. How can you say it meant nothing?" He stood up from the table, and I saw terror in his eyes. He wanted to convince me that everything was fine, but I knew he was lying. I was confused, Mary Lou. Work, debts, everything was weighing on me. And then, with the guys, I just wanted to forget. It was just once. It means nothing. But his words made no sense. He said it was just once, but I knew it wasn't just that. I knew something else was happening, and the lies he told me only made me feel more alone. How could he justify something like that? How could he ask me to believe such an obvious lie? I looked at him and, for the first time, felt completely lost. I no longer knew who he was, nor what had happened to our lives. He was destroying me, and I didn't know how to stop it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit him. But instead, I stood there, paralyzed, my eyes full of tears that I tried to hide. I didn't want to see the truth, but it was right there, before me, and I knew there was no escaping it. I got up from the table and walked away from him, not knowing what to do. I was completely devastated, and as he tried to reach me, something inside me died. I knew that, no matter how much we tried, nothing would ever be the same again. And the pain I felt, that poignant pain that consumed me, was the price of truth, and that truth tore me apart. Time seemed to drag on endlessly after the truth was revealed. I still felt the weight of Thomas's betrayal on me, like a constant shadow that followed me every step. What I feared most happened. Our life was turned upside down, and like a wave, its impact was not limited to me alone. Samuel, my son, the light of my life, was also swept into this whirlwind. Thomas tried to convince me that he regretted it, that he still loved me, that what he had done meant nothing. But nothing he said made sense to me. I saw the emptiness in his eyes, and everything he tried to hide was etched on his face. He no longer knew what to do, nor how to fix things. I didn't know either. I wanted to believe the pain would pass, that he would change, but my soul was so broken that I could no longer see a way out. Every day, I saw Samuel grow more distant from me, as if he was starting to understand that something was wrong. He began to ask questions I didn't know how to answer. He was no longer that naive child, full of joy and dreams. Now he was a cautious boy, with heavier eyes and a less sincere smile. That afternoon, while I was in the kitchen, preparing lunch, Samuel appeared at the living room door. His eyes were downcast, as if avoiding looking at me. He entered slowly, dragging his feet, as if afraid of breaking the silence that had settled between us. He sat at the table, and for a moment, we just watched each other. I saw the pain in his eyes, but I didn't know what to do to ease it. "Mom," he began, his voice hesitant, as if trying to gather strength to say something that scared him. "What's happening? Why is Daddy so distant from me? He doesn't play with me anymore. Or with you. What happened to our family?" The pain in my chest tightened like a knife. How could I explain to my son that the man he loved had betrayed us? How could I tell him that everything he believed about the world was about to change forever? "I don't know, my love," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, but failing. "I don't know what happened to him either. He's going through something, and he's trying to understand. But this isn't your fault, Samuel. It never will be." He looked at me, as if trying to understand what I was saying, but I knew he was confused, lost. How could I protect him from this pain? How could I protect him from the emptiness that was spreading through our house? In the following days, the situation at home only worsened. Thomas continued to distance himself, and the gap between him and Samuel became increasingly evident. I saw Samuel trying to get his father's attention, trying to make him play with him, like before, but Thomas was so lost in his own guilt that he couldn't see how much he was hurting his son, how much he was hurting our family. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him how much this was destroying me, but the words simply wouldn't come out. And Samuel? He started spending more time out of the house, looking for distraction, looking for some way to escape the tension that hung in the air. He distanced himself from me too, and I knew he wasn't just running from Thomas, but from me, from our shared pain. He was trying to find himself, to protect himself from a world that was slowly disintegrating. One night, as I sat on the porch, looking at the stars, Samuel approached me. Without saying a word, he sat beside me and remained silent, his eyes turned to the sky, as if trying to find some answer in the stars. I knew what he was thinking. I knew he was feeling the pain I felt, that he was starting to realize the gravity of the situation. "Mom," he finally said, his voice low but firm. "I want to be big. I want to be like Daddy, take care of you, like he said he would. I want to make you smile again." My heart broke even more hearing those words. How could I tell him that the father he admired so much was drifting away from us? How could I tell him that although he wanted to take care of me, he still didn't understand the depth of the pain we were experiencing? "You already take care of me, my love," I replied, trying to hide the tears that threatened to fall. "You already do so much, Samuel. I just need you by my side, and you've been doing that." He looked at me with eyes full of love and concern, and at that moment, I felt a mix of pride and pain. He was growing up, but at what cost? I was seeing my son try to carry a burden that shouldn't be his, and that broke me. In the days that followed, Samuel began to change in subtle but noticeable ways. He became more mature, more responsible, as if he was trying to compensate for Thomas's absence in our lives. He took on the role of man of the house without anyone asking, without him even realizing it. He helped more with household chores, tried to make me smile with little jokes, but I knew that deep down, he was sacrificing himself. He wasn't just trying to please me, he was trying to fill the void his father had left in his life, and I knew that wouldn't be easy. One afternoon, while I was working at my sewing machine, Samuel approached with a shy smile on his face, but his eyes were serious, as if he was about to do something important. He was holding a small piece of paper in his hands, and when he showed it to me, I could see that he had drawn a small sketch of a house with a tree in the garden and a star shining at the top. He looked at me and said, "I made this, Mom, for us, for you and me. I want us to have a place where we can be happy again, where everything will be okay." I looked at him, and tears began to fall. I wanted to hug him, tell him how incredible he was, but at that moment, something inside me knew that he was trying to fill a void that he shouldn't carry. I wished I could do that for him, but instead I was the one who needed to be strong. I needed to be strong for him, because he didn't deserve to carry that weight. And at that moment, I promised myself that I would do whatever it took so he wouldn't have to suffer anymore. Life in Bell Buckle was becoming unbearable. Every street, every face reminded me of what I had lost, of what had been destroyed. I wanted to run away, but I knew I couldn't. The pain was inside me, like a constant shadow, and what scared me most was that it was starting to affect everything around me. Even Samuel, with his youth and innocence, didn't escape it. I saw how he tried to be the man of the house, how he strived to be strong for me, and that broke me. It shouldn't be like this. He shouldn't carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. But as the days passed, he was starting to get lost, and I didn't know how to help him. The truth is, after the revelation of Thomas's betrayal, something changed inside me. I knew that my life, as I knew it, would never be the same. Something inside me, something I never imagined would exist, ignited. I was no longer willing to live in silence, at the mercy of the pain Thomas had caused. I was no longer willing to be the woman who pretends everything is fine, when inside, she is falling apart. It was a Saturday afternoon when I made a decision. Samuel was in the backyard, playing with the wooden cart Thomas had made for him years ago, and I was on the porch, looking at the horizon, lost in my thoughts. And then, I heard the sound of the doorbell, followed by a familiar voice, but one I dreaded hearing again. It was Clara, my friend of many years, someone who had always been by my side, even when I tried to push her away. She entered without waiting for an invitation, as she always did, and sat in front of me. Her eyes were full of concern, but also understanding. Clara knew what was happening, even when I tried to hide it. She was never one to beat around the bush, and that both scared and comforted me. "Mary Lou," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I know what you're going through, and I know you're trying to be strong, but you can't keep living like this. You need to free yourself." I looked at her, trying to find words, but nothing seemed enough. How could I free myself? How could I take the next step when everything I had built seemed to have crumbled in the blink of an eye? "I know you're hurt, but you're also full of life," Clara continued, as if she knew what was going through my mind. "You deserve more than to live in the shadows of something that no longer exists. Thomas betrayed you, but that doesn't define you. You are no longer the Mary Lou he knew. You are someone much stronger." I looked at her, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions inside me. I knew she was right. I couldn't keep living in Thomas's shadow, in a life that was no longer mine. I needed something new, a change. But what about Samuel? How could I do this without hurting him even more? "I know you're worried about Samuel," Clara said, as if reading my thoughts. "But he also needs to see you live. He needs to see you being happy again. He needs to see that you are no longer imprisoned by the pain Thomas caused." Those words stuck in my mind like an inevitable truth. Samuel needed to see that, even after all the pain, there was still life to live. And perhaps, if he saw that in me, he would start to believe that he too could move forward. I knew I couldn't change what had happened, but I still had the power to change how I would live the rest of my life. In the following days, I gathered the courage to face a new reality. Thomas continued to distance himself, and I realized more and more that he was no longer willing to try to fix things. He talked about working more, going out with friends, but I knew deep down that he was lost forever. I looked at him and no longer saw the man I married. I saw a stranger, someone who was sinking into his own lies. There was no more love, and, in a way, I had already accepted that. The pain was no longer as sharp, but it was still deep. I didn't know what the next step would be. I didn't know what would come next, but something inside me knew I had to do something. I needed to free myself from this emotional prison I had created for myself. It was that day that I received a call from Samuel. He was at a coffee shop in the neighboring town and wanted to tell me something important. I knew there was something more in his eyes, something he hadn't told me yet. When I met him, I immediately noticed he was nervous. The smile he gave me was shy, but at the same time, there was something more there, something I couldn't decipher. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling, "there's someone I want to introduce you to." I looked at him, confused, but at the same time, feeling a wave of joy. He was growing up, and this moment made me realize that he was starting to take his own steps, starting to make decisions about his own life. "Who is she, Samuel?" I asked, trying to contain the emotion that was starting to overflow. He smiled, and his eyes shone like never before. "Her name is Emily. She's very special to me." I want to ask her to marry me." I looked at him, and for a moment, the whole world stopped. My son was growing up, falling in love, and ready to build his own life, and in a way, that gave me the courage I needed to finally take the next step. I knew the pain of losing Thomas would be something I would have to live with, but seeing my son find love gave me hope. He was starting to create his own path, and maybe it was time for me to do the same. "I want you to be happy, my love," I said, holding his hands. "And if she's the person who makes you happy, then that's what matters. I'm very proud of you." And at that moment, something inside me healed. Seeing Samuel ready to move forward gave me strength to start my own healing journey. I knew the future was still uncertain, but for the first time, I felt that maybe I could move forward too. I was sitting on the porch, watching the clear sky of Bell Buckle, and for a moment, I thought the town might still have something magical to offer me. But the truth was, I no longer saw Bell Buckle with the same eyes. Every corner of the town, every familiar face, reminded me of what I had lost. What once seemed like home now became a memory of something that no longer existed, something that was being undone by Thomas's lies and betrayal. Samuel, however, seemed to see things differently. The love he felt for Emily was evident, and even with all the challenges we, as a family, had faced, he seemed lighter, happier. He was so excited about his wedding, about the promise of a better future, that his joy began to become a balm for the pain I still carried. I wanted to see my son happy, and I knew he had found someone special. But at the same time, there was a part of me that felt guilty. How could I look at Samuel's happiness without feeling devastated by what had happened with Thomas? How could I see my son about to start his own life when I was still stuck in the past? And although I tried to focus on what was important, on Samuel and his future, I knew that my own pain was still a heavy burden that I carried alone. Samuel's wedding was approaching. Flowers were being arranged in the church, food was being prepared, and the town was getting ready for the big day. At first, I didn't want to get involved in anything. I didn't want to be part of the celebration because it would force me to face the reality that Thomas and I were no longer the same. But when I saw the smile on Samuel's face, the sparkle in his eyes, the need to be strong for him spoke louder. I got involved in the preparations, helping with the decoration, organizing the details. I wanted to be present. I wanted to support my son. But at the same time, I felt a growing pain, as if I was forcing myself to live a lie, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, when in fact, I was broken inside. On the eve of the wedding, I woke up with the feeling that the day would be harder than I imagined. Although I was happy to see Samuel about to start a new chapter, there was something in my heart that told me something was about to happen. Something I didn't want to face, but knew that if I wanted to move forward, I needed to confront. When I went to Samuel's room to see how he was getting ready, I found him nervous, but full of enthusiasm. He was wearing the suit he had chosen, trying to adjust it in front of the mirror. "You look beautiful, my love," I said, trying to hide the emotion that was forming in my throat. He turned to me with a nervous smile, and his eyes were so full of dreams and promises. "Mom, I don't know what to do. What if she says no? What if I make a mistake?" he said, his voice trembling, with an insecurity I had never seen before. He was always so confident, so strong, but now, with sweaty hands and a tense expression, he seemed like a boy again, someone who needed my protection, my approval. "You won't make a mistake, Samuel. You love her, and she loves you. That's all that matters. Don't be afraid of what's to come. Trust your heart, and know that no matter what happens, I'll be here, always, for you." He looked at me with tear-filled eyes, and for a moment, I felt that the words he needed to hear were the ones I myself needed to hear. I needed to believe that what I was going through was not the end. I needed to believe that love still had strength, that happiness could still be built, even after so much pain. I hugged him tightly, and in that instant, I felt something stir within me. There was a strength that had not yet been completely lost. I still had the power to move forward, to be the mother Samuel needed. And looking at him, I realized that his happiness should be my priority. I couldn't keep living in the past, in the shadows of what Thomas had done to me. I needed to fight for Samuel's future. I needed to fight for both of us. The wedding day arrived, and Bell Buckle was more alive than ever. The town was full of smiles, cheerful conversations, and a positive energy that I couldn't ignore, although I was still distant from everything happening around me. I prepared for the event, putting on the dress I had chosen for the occasion, trying to hide the pain that still consumed every part of me. I wanted to be strong. I wanted to be present, but I knew that Thomas's shadows still accompanied me. I met Emily before the ceremony, and seeing her, I realized how nervous she was, but also so full of life, of dreams. She smiled at me and thanked me, her voice soft, but full of gratitude. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Mary Lou. I don't know what I would do without your support." I smiled, trying to hide the emotion that almost made me lose my composure. Emily was the woman Samuel had chosen, the woman he believed to be his partner for the rest of his life. I knew that, for him, she was everything he needed, and that gave me a sense of peace, that perhaps, somehow, he would find the happiness I no longer knew how to find. When the ceremony began, everything seemed perfect. Samuel was radiant, and Emily was stunning, with a shy smile, but full of hope. When she entered the church, all eyes were on her, but the only gaze that mattered was Samuel's. And when he saw her, his eyes shone as if she were the only person in the world. They loved each other, and that in some way gave me the strength I needed. But there was something inside me that was still not completely at peace. I knew Thomas would be there, and although he had distanced himself from me, I still loved him. But that love was transforming into something I could no longer control, something I didn't know how to deal with. When Thomas arrived at the church, I saw him out of the corner of my eye. He was alone, with an empty expression, and his presence made me feel an enormous weight in my heart. I wished he was the person he once was, the man with whom I shared my dreams. But he was no longer that man. He was lost, and I no longer knew how to help him. The ceremony continued its course, and when Samuel and Emily exchanged vows, I felt a mixture of joy and pain. The joy was from seeing my son so happy, but the pain was from the loss, from the part of me that was still in pieces. But looking at Samuel, I felt that he was starting a new life, a life full of possibilities, of love, and that somehow this new life meant a new beginning for all of us. When the newlyweds left the church, hands intertwined, everyone's eyes followed, but it was Samuel's expression that touched me most. He was happy. He had found his happiness, and that was all I needed to know, that perhaps, just perhaps, things could get better. After Samuel's wedding, the world seemed to calm down for a moment. The joy of the event was still fresh in the air, and Bell Buckle seemed to have found temporary peace. For a brief moment, I felt like I could breathe. I had seen Samuel start his own journey, and I knew that somehow he was ready to move forward, to build the life he desired. But while he took big steps towards the future, I was still stuck in the past. The emptiness Thomas left in our house was palpable. Even when he was home, he was distant, as if an invisible wall had risen between us. Sometimes he tried to approach, but there was something so cold in his gestures that made me doubt his intentions. He looked at me as if he wanted to speak, but could never find the right words. And I no longer knew what I wanted to hear. I knew that anything he said would be an attempt to convince me of something that, deep down, I already knew. Our relationship was over. The tension inside the house was unbearable. Samuel no longer spent as much time at home. He was adjusting to his new life, and I knew he was trying to find his place in the world, away from the pain that still haunted us. He didn't talk much about the wedding, but I saw the sparkle in his eyes. He was at peace, and that made me want to find my own peace too. But looking at Thomas, I felt that my peace was still distant. How could I move forward when the man I once loved was still there, so close, yet so distant? With each passing day, I found myself at a crossroads, not knowing which path to take. I still loved him in some way, but the pain of betrayal had corroded the trust I had in him. I no longer knew who he was. I only knew that I couldn't continue living that way, trapped in a past that couldn't be undone. But, at the same time, a part of me still wanted to believe that he could change, that he could still be the man I knew. The truth, however, was becoming clearer and clearer. The man I loved no longer existed. And then, one night, while I was in the living room, sewing another dress for a client, Thomas came in and sat beside me. He seemed more tired than ever, with slumped shoulders and a lost look. I knew he wanted to talk, but for some reason, I didn't want to hear what he had to say. The pain was already too much for me. "Mary Lou," he began, his voice hoarse and hesitant. I know I hurt you, and that will haunt me forever. I don't know how to explain what happened, but the truth is, with everything that was going on, I got lost. I got lost, Mary Lou. I looked at him without saying anything. What did he want from me? I could no longer believe his words, not after everything he had done. He had deceived me, betrayed me in such a profound way that I no longer knew if I would ever be able to trust him again. He was asking for forgiveness, but forgiveness was not what he needed from me. He needed to forgive himself, and that, I knew, wouldn't happen as long as we continued this lie. "I know you're lost, Thomas," I said, my voice tense, "but I can no longer be the person who will try to fix you. I can no longer carry the weight of what you did. I've carried it for too long, and I've drifted so far from who I am that I no longer know who I am." I saw the pain in his eyes. He knew what he had done, but the truth is, he also knew it was too late. What remained between us was no longer a marriage. It was a destroyed relationship, and time couldn't heal that. The trust we had was broken, and I knew there was no more room for it between us. "I love you, Mary Lou," he said, his voice faltering. "But I know I lost you. I know I lost everything." I got up from the chair, the weight of his words hitting me like a punch to the stomach. I wanted to believe he still cared, but something inside me told me he no longer knew what to do with that love. He had lost himself, and I had lost myself too. The love between us had been consumed by lies, by betrayal, and now all that remained was the echo of what we once were. "I don't know anymore, Thomas," I said, my words colder than I imagined. "I don't know what love is anymore. I don't know what it is to trust you anymore. And most importantly, I don't know if I want to keep trying." I saw the pain in his face, but I no longer cared. The pain I felt now was mine, and I knew only I could heal it. I knew that forgiveness was a long process, but I wasn't ready to take that step yet. What I needed now was to find my own strength, my own path. That night, after he had left the room, I was alone, listening to the sound of the empty house. Loneliness was becoming my constant companion, but I knew I needed to learn to live with it. I needed to learn to be strong for myself, for Samuel, and above all, for the woman I was becoming. Because although I didn't yet know what the future held for me, one thing was certain. I could no longer live in the past. I could no longer live with the shadows of a life that no longer existed. And it was in that silence, in that emptiness, that I found the truth. It wasn't about Thomas. It wasn't about what he had done or what he could still do. It was about what I would do from that moment on. I needed to move forward, no matter how difficult it was, no matter how much it hurt. I needed to live for myself. Days dragged on as if time had lost its meaning. Bell Buckle, with its quiet days and familiar streets, now seemed like a prison. I walked the same streets, saw the same people, but nothing felt the same anymore. The pain I felt was like a dark cloud hanging over me, obscuring even the simplest parts of life. It was hard to breathe, hard to live a life that seemed to have been stolen from me by someone who once promised to be my companion. And I knew, deep down, that the worst was yet to come. Thomas hadn't been home for days. He left without a word, without even looking back. I didn't know where he was or what he was doing, but in a way, I no longer cared. Not anymore. I had to live my life without him now. I didn't know how, but I knew it was the only possible way. The pain of seeing him leave was different from what I expected. I imagined I would feel anger, revenge, but what I felt was an immense loneliness, as if he had taken not only trust, but also the part of me that believed things could one day return to normal. I no longer believed that. Not anymore. Samuel was home more often, but the silence between us was heavy. He tried to cheer me up with stories from work or his new plans, but I saw the worry in his eyes. He knew I was broken. He knew that despite all attempts to move forward, the hole inside me was still there, deepening every day. The truth is, I no longer knew who I was. What was left of me? Was I the betrayed wife? The abandoned woman? Or did I still have an identity beyond that? I needed to find an answer, but at the same time, I didn't know where to start. It was on a rainy afternoon, after weeks of silence and separation, that Thomas reappeared. The doorbell rang and, opening the door, there he was. I saw him standing at my door, with tired eyes and the expression of someone who had lost his way. He said nothing, just stood there, as if waiting for me to speak first. The silence between us was louder than any words he could say. "Are you coming home?" I asked, my voice colder than I imagined. I knew he had distanced himself from me, but I also knew I was no longer willing to live, waiting for someone who didn't know what he wanted. "I don't know," he replied, his voice low and hesitant. I don't know what I'm doing, Mary Lou. I left because I thought we needed some time, but now I see I was an idiot. I know I lost you. I know. You won't forgive me, and I understand that, but I needed to say it, needed to try." I watched him in silence. He stood there trying to apologize, trying to do something that deep down I knew wouldn't change anything. There was no more room for apologies between us. There was only the emptiness of betrayal, the hole he had dug and which, now, he could no longer fill. I no longer believed his words. I no longer believed anything he said. "I can't go back, Thomas," I said, my voice full of sadness and certainty. "I can't. I lost myself in this marriage. I lost myself in you. And now I need to find who I am, without you. I can no longer wait for a change that will never come. I can no longer wait for something that is already over." I saw the pain in his eyes. He wanted to get closer, wanted to touch me, but I recoiled. I knew that, deep down, he was saying goodbye. But what he didn't understand was that the goodbye had already happened. He hadn't lost me that night. He lost me when he decided to lie to me, when he chose alcohol and lies instead of the trust we had built. And realizing this, I saw that in fact, he wasn't saying goodbye to me. He was saying goodbye to us, to a life that would never be the same. He stood there, still, as if the weight of those words was sinking into him, but said nothing more. He just turned his back and walked out the door. And as he walked away, something inside me ignited. The pain, the fear, the anger. Everything seemed to have transformed into a new strength. I no longer loved him, not in the way I thought I loved him. What remained was an emptiness, yes, but there was also a freedom I didn't know existed, a freedom to live my life, to be who I really was. In the following days, everything seemed different, but the feeling that something new was forming inside me intensified with each moment. I was learning to live without him, to be who I wanted to be, without the weight of guilt or betrayal dragging me down. It was during a quiet night, when Samuel was at work, that I finally allowed myself to cry. I cried for everything I had lost, for everything I had sacrificed in the name of a love that no longer existed. I cried for the woman I no longer recognized, but more importantly, I cried for the woman who was beginning to emerge. I knew the pain was still present, that the scars would take time to heal, but something in me was already different. I had to move forward. I had to be strong, not only for Samuel, but for myself. And as the sound of rain fell softly outside, I knew that the pain would not be eternal. Time, with its own scars, would finally begin to heal me. Life was never easy, but at that moment, it felt like every step I took was like walking on broken glass. Even with the best intentions, with the hope of a better future, I still carried the scars Thomas had left, but something inside me was changing, and I knew I had to do something to turn all that pain into strength, because somehow, no matter how deep the pain, I knew I could no longer live in the shadows of what had been. Samuel was more distant, trying to find his own stability with Emily. I saw him starting to settle into his newlywed life, and a part of me felt at peace seeing him grow, but another part, the most selfish one, felt as if he was drifting away from me. He no longer needed me in the same way, and for me, that was a painful reminder that, as time passes, we all follow our own paths, our own destinies, and somehow, mine was changing rapidly. I knew I couldn't keep living in Bell Buckle. Every street reminded me of broken promises, of dreams that dissolved into reality. But what scared me most was that I no longer knew what it was like to live without Thomas's constant presence. He had distanced himself so much, but there were still echoes of his absence everywhere. I was trying to find a way to start over, but I didn't know how. The pain of being left behind, the pain of being betrayed, was rooted in me, like a poisonous plant. It was Clara once again, who helped me realize what needed to be done. She appeared at my house one morning, as always, without asking permission. She didn't know how my life was unfolding, how emptiness consumed me, but her presence was the first reminder that I wasn't alone. She entered my house as if she owned the place, and when she sat in front of me, looked at me with the same frankness as always. "Mary Lou," she said without mincing words, "you're worrying me to death. You can't keep living like this. You won't find healing in the past. You need to free yourself. And that means starting from scratch. It might be scary, but you have to take the first step. And that step starts now. Here. I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, felt a wave of relief. Relief to know that she wasn't just watching me from afar, but that she truly cared, that she was willing to push me out of the darkness. I knew what she was saying made sense, but the idea of starting over scared me, as if I had to forget everything I had been, everything I had loved. And how could I do that? I don't know, Clara. I don't know where to start, I said, my voice trembling. I don't know how to start over when all I have is the echo of pain. You start with what you have, with what is yours. You have a life, Mary Lou. Don't let it be defined by someone else's pain, Clara replied firmly. You are a strong woman, and no matter how much you doubt it, what you need to do is put one foot in front of the other. That's the beginning. Her words began to make sense, even though I was hesitant. I no longer had Thomas. I no longer had the life I dreamed of with him. But perhaps I had something else inside me, something I hadn't discovered yet. That afternoon, after Clara left, I went for a walk. I needed air, space. I didn't know if I was looking for answers or just trying to escape my own thoughts. But as I walked the streets of Bell Buckle for the last time, something broke inside me. I looked at the town, at the familiar faces, at the trees that had accompanied me for so many years, and for the first time, I saw that it wasn't the town that held me back. It was my own fear, the fear of starting over, the fear of the unknown. I knew I had to leave Bell Buckle. The town, which was once my home, now seemed too small for what I needed to be, for what I needed to live. And as I walked, I realized that it wasn't the place I needed to change, but myself. I needed to free myself from my own shackles. I needed a new beginning, not just from Bell Buckle, but from myself. The first step was harder than I imagined. It wasn't simply packing my bags and leaving. It was more about making peace with myself, facing the pain, and recognizing that I was more than the woman who had been left behind. I was Mary Lou, and that somehow still meant something. I didn't have a concrete plan, but I knew that, in time, I would find my place. I had my sewing, my talent, my skill, and I knew I could rebuild my life somewhere where the scars of the past wouldn't follow me every step of the way. The next morning was marked by a decision. I decided to sell the house where all the pain and memories accumulated. I knew I couldn't live there anymore. Samuel had already started his life, and I needed to start mine. The house that was once my refuge was now a prison, and I couldn't stay there anymore. When I finally found a buyer and signed the papers, I felt a weight lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new, something that, until then, I had been afraid to try. I looked back one last time before leaving the house, and in my mind, the echoes of the past began to fade. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to move forward. I knew I had to find myself, for myself, without the ghosts of a life I no longer wanted to live. I never imagined it would be easy to start over. There was something about starting fresh that gave me a fear I couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the fear of failing again, of committing myself to something that wouldn't be enough to erase what I had lived through. I knew the future wouldn't be simple, but the truth was, looking at the horizon, something inside me told me there was more life out there, something more than the pain I had carried until then. In Franklin, I found a new beginning. I rented a small house, far from the memory of Bell Buckle. A simple house, with a garden in the back, where I could start planting something that was mine. The environment was new, more vibrant, and looking out the window, I felt the sensation that something new was truly happening. But no matter how different everything seemed, there was something inside me that still couldn't shake off the shadows. The echo of what happened in Bell Buckle was always there, like a subtle but painful reminder. Samuel began to adjust to his new life, and with that, he started giving me more space. He was focused on his own dreams, on his future with Emily, and with each passing day, he distanced himself a little more from me. I knew this was natural, but it hurt. He was growing up, but I still found myself lost in a past that wouldn't let me go. Work began to help me find some balance. I started sewing for a local shop, and little by little, I created a routine that made me feel like I could reclaim some of my identity. There were still many lonely nights, moments when doubt and fear took over me, but I was starting to find some peace in my work, in my own accomplishments. I was no longer just Mary Lou, the betrayed wife. I was Mary Lou, the woman who was rebuilding her life, stone by stone. But, as always happens, the past has a way of showing up when we least expect it. I was at the market in the morning, buying some fruits and vegetables, when I heard a name that made me stop in my tracks. I knew it couldn't be true, but looking at the person who called me, I saw that it was exactly what I feared. Thomas. He was there, standing in the checkout line, his eyes a little tired, but with that smile I knew so well. For a moment, time seemed to stop, and seeing him, a whirlwind of feelings formed inside me. Fear, anger, sadness, and to my surprise, even longing. I wanted to keep walking, ignore him, but something told me I needed to face that moment, needed to face the reality that the past could not be buried without being properly confronted. "Mary Lou," he said when he saw me. His voice was hesitant, as if he knew that any word he said could be the last. "I didn't expect to find you here." I looked at him, trying to control the emotions that were surging inside me. "What are you doing here, Thomas?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but failing. He seemed different, but at the same time, so familiar. The smell of alcohol was still on his pores, the same sense of emptiness I had always seen in the last months of our marriage. I was just passing through," he replied with an expression I could no longer read. "I knew you were in Franklin, and well, I thought, maybe I could see how you're doing. I know things didn't end well, and I understand if you don't want to talk to me. But I needed to see you, Mary Lou. I needed to apologize." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say everything I felt, everything he had done and how he had destroyed everything between us. But for some reason, I remained silent. I looked at him, seeing the remnants of the man with whom I shared my life, and knew, at that moment, that there was nothing left to say. "I don't know what you expect from me, Thomas," I said, my voice low but determined. "You hurt me. You destroyed our family. I can no longer be the woman you need, nor the woman you want me to be. I need something more now. I need myself. And you need to go your own way." I saw the despair in his eyes, but I no longer felt the desire to console him, to make him understand what he had lost. He already knew. He already knew the pain he caused, but he couldn't expect me to still be the woman he met years ago. I had changed, and he had gotten lost along the way. "I just wanted you to know I'm sorry, Mary Lou," he said before walking away. "I will always love you. Always." I stood there, in the middle of the market, feeling an emptiness I never imagined I would feel. He was gone, and with him, it seemed that the last remnant of who he was to me was also gone. I knew he still carried his own pain, but that no longer mattered to me. I no longer needed him. I no longer needed to live in the shadow of what he did to me. I needed to continue my life, even if, sometimes, it was difficult. I needed to let go. At that moment, something inside me quieted. The anger, the sadness, the resentment, they were still there, but now more like a distant memory, a reminder of something that no longer had power over me. I was stronger than I imagined. Upon returning home, as I walked the streets of Franklin, I realized that the biggest obstacle I had to overcome was not Thomas. It wasn't the memories of Belle Buckle. The biggest obstacle was myself, and finally, I was starting to realize that, to move forward, I would need to free myself from everything I carried inside me. And somehow, I knew that this confrontation, this farewell to the past, was the first step to truly start living. It was the first step to be who I really wanted to be. I never imagined that the last goodbye would be so difficult. I wasn't talking about Thomas anymore, but about myself, about the woman I had been. I had already said goodbye to him, to that life we shared, but the biggest goodbye was to what I had become, to the woman who believed that pain was permanent, to the woman who let herself be defined by the mistakes of others. That morning, as I looked at the house where we lived together, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Everything seemed emptier now, not just because the house was empty, but because I felt that part of me still remained there. The memories of laughter, of moments we shared, of promises made, still echoed in the walls. And no matter how much I had made the decision to move away, the last goodbye was inevitable. I stood on the porch, watching the clear sky of Franklin. The gentle wind rustled the leaves of the trees, and life around me seemed so calm, so serene. I could no longer carry the scars of the past. What I felt for Thomas was no longer the love it once was. It was the recognition that something that was once important, no longer part of who I was. The pain wouldn't disappear instantly, but I was finally starting to give myself permission to heal. The house was sold, and with the sale, a part of me said goodbye to what could have been. Samuel was already out of Bell Buckle, living with Emily, and although I still missed him dearly, I knew he was on a good journey, and my pride in him only grew. I wanted him to have the happiness that I, for so long, sought in something that could no longer be found. I took a deep breath, feeling the lightness of the air, and, as strange as it seemed, a sense of freedom invaded my chest. The freedom to choose what I wanted to be from now on. The freedom to live without the weight of what happened, without allowing another person's failures to define me. In the days that followed, I made a decision that for many might seem bold. I was going to move. Although Franklin had been a good place to start, I knew that true transformation came from being away from what tied me to the past. I needed to explore the world outside my comfort zone. I wanted to rediscover myself as a woman, as a person. And to do that, I knew that physical distance would help create the emotional distance I so desperately needed. Before leaving, something told me I should take a final step to close the cycle. I had something to resolve, something I had never faced. Even if forgiving Thomas was no longer something I felt I needed to give him, something inside me told me I should give that forgiveness to myself. I went to the small shop where I had worked for the past few months, picked up a notebook and a pen, and began to write a letter. It wasn't a letter to him, but a letter to myself, so I could finally tell myself what I had never allowed myself to say before. Thomas, I forgave you, and more importantly, I set you free. I know it wouldn't be fair to keep living in the shadow of what you did. It's not for you, but for me. You can no longer tie me to the pain of what we were, because we both have already gone our separate ways. What I gave you was the best of me, but you didn't know what to do with it. I am no longer the woman you left behind. I am Mary Lou, and from now on, that's who I'm going to be. I no longer need you to be happy. I am my own happiness. When I finished the letter, I felt lighter. It wasn't a letter full of resentment or bitter words. It was a letter of liberation. Because by finally forgiving myself, I felt that somehow I was healing. I was leaving the weight of guilt, doubt, and sadness behind. The next morning, I left the letter on the kitchen table before heading out for the last trip. I didn't know if he would ever read it, but somehow that no longer mattered. I knew my forgiveness didn't need his validation. It was mine, and that was enough. On my last day in Franklin, I looked at the town one last time. That place that now represented a new phase of my life. As I drove to my new destination, I felt a peace I never imagined I would feel again. I was leaving, not to escape, but to find myself. I was leaving to start writing the next chapter with the ink of my own story. I still didn't know exactly where life would take me. Perhaps a bigger city, where I could give myself more opportunities. Perhaps a quiet place, where I could take a deep breath and start over. What I knew for sure was that I was following my own path, a path of self-acceptance, forgiveness, and finally, learning to be happy alone. And it was with that thought, with the wind caressing my face as I drove into the unknown, that I understood a fundamental truth. No matter how many times you fall, what matters is what you do next. I was starting over, and this time, it was my choice. I was finally ready to live for myself, without the chains that the past had imposed on me.
I stitched up hope on bell buckle afternoons, with a child in my arms and a love I'm not sure was ever real. He'd come home wearing the scent of distance, and I told myself it'll pass, just another day to feel. My wedding dress still holds the silence of vows that crumbled with the weight of years. He swore our love would outlast the storms, but he jumped ship when the waves brought tears. And I, pretending everything could still be fixed, hid the broken pieces in my apron seams. But the scars no one can see are the ones that scream the loudest when the world falls apart. I'm done bleeding in silence, done being strong for two hearts. Now it's my time to live, even if it starts with tears and ends in fire. My little boy said, "Mama, I'll take care of you." But what kind of world turns sons into shields? He became a man in the echo of his father's absence, and I became both stone and bloom in the same barren field. One day he returned with regret in his eyes, but forgiveness isn't a patch for the soul. I looked at him and saw a stranger, and I saw myself reborn in the silence of letting go. The scars no one can see are maps of every fire I survived. I'm not the woman he broke, I'm the woman I revived. And now if I'm gonna love again, it starts with me.